blood sugar crashes from eating a high carb diet, eating a lot of sugar. People get hangry. We say hangry, but that's a mood. I mean, it's a change in your mood, right? And hypoglycemia is definitely a thing, and people don't even realize how much their blood sugars drop. I actually had a patient that woke up in the middle of the night with panic attacks because the blood sugar dropped so low, and your body is absolutely going to wake you up in an emergency, because if it allowed it to go even lower, you would die.
Have you been feeling off? You know what? Your hormones might be out of whack. Take my quiz to discover your personalized hormone imbalance and get a free report with your results. Learn what's really going on with your hormones and start feeling like yourself again. Just visit the website quiz.hormoneshelp.com to take the hormone quiz now.
Dr. Achina, I'm excited to have this conversation because I think what we're going to talk about today is such an overlooked symptom that women go through, and the medications and things that we often use for perimenopause and menopause are, directly related. So it's this weird dichotomy of let's pretend that this doesn't happen to women, and then let's use medications that have been designed to address depression and anxiety for other symptoms. So I'm glad we're digging in today. So Dr. Achina, glad to have you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Betty. I love having these kinds of conversations.
I do too. So before we get started, I'd love to hear, what's your story about coming to functional medicine? I hate to say it, but nobody goes, hey, I think I'm going to go find this new avenue. It's almost always through our own trauma or family trauma. And so I feel like it helps people also understand that we've probably been there to some degree. So tell me your story.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. It seems like most people who do functional medicine, it's not just their path that they've always wanted to do as a child. So I came to functional medicine through my son's health journey. When he was 14, he became acutely depressed and suicidal overnight. It was something out of the blue. We had no idea why it happened. It was after a tiff with his brother. And then suddenly he's standing on a ledge 5 floors up, ready to jump. And so this was out of the blue. And, most people would say, well, you have depression on both sides of your family. What do you expect? Be happy that 1 of 3 of your children gets depressed statistically. But, I knew that there was something else going on because it just didn't make any sense to me being a psychiatrist myself. So and he did have a particular symptom that was double vision. We didn't realize it was double vision. It was more expressed as I can't read anymore, but it turned out to be double vision. And that made me think, oh, there must be something going on, being a conventional psychiatrist then, there must be something going on in his brain. So something neurological. And I took him to a number of doctors, and nobody could tell me that what might be causing this. And he originally saw a psychiatrist and a therapist right from the get-go. He was on 4 medications, and he was basically a zombie at the age of 14. And I just felt like something's going on here. Nobody's helping me. I got to do this by myself, figure it out on my own. And I did. And I happened to learn about functional medicine as well. And long story short, he had celiac disease. And because of it, he was very malnourished. And, just a whole host of problems by finding the root causes. And within 2 months, he was significantly better just removing gluten, dairy, and soy. And he had some signs of issues that we just thought was, part of him. That's just who he is, constipated and eczematic. That's what he had all his life. Those 2 things resolved in the first 2 months, and he was on board because he lived with that all his life. He was on board to do the rest of the journey. And so within a year, he was off of most of the medications. I think it took 2 years completely to come off the medications completely. The double vision took a while to resolve, actually. And that was, his cranial nerves. If you think about it, the cranial nerves that move your eyes were really inflamed. And so that took a while to improve. And so once we got him, well, he was literally well off meds. He still saw a psychotherapist for social issues, but other than that, he was pretty well, he was fine. He was doing well. And it carried through most of his life. He had his ups and downs in college, but got better. And then I went through the functional medicine approach for my own health issues. And, I'm doing pretty well health-wise as well.
As somebody who doesn't have children, right? I don't have kids. I can only sort of guess. I can imagine being in your position and also being a psychiatrist and how I think I would feel very overwhelmed by the fact that my toolkit wasn't working for my own child. Like, because our brain, when we go through pregnancy, completely revamps and remaps to go hit the amygdala, save your child, and I would think that would be such a hard edge to run up against.
Oh my gosh, it was. I mean, you turn into a mama bear, protecting your child, doing everything you can. I would lay down my life. Yeah. And so with this, having this experience, so many people go through that kind of experience and hit these walls and are told, well, just live with it. This is your life. And that's just terrible. And so being a conventional psychiatrist at the time, I felt like I can't do this way anymore. I just can't do it this way anymore. Once you see the power of functional medicine and how it totally improves not just your brain, but your whole body and ultimately, your soul, it really to me, there's no other way when it comes to chronic disease. Certainly there is a place for medication. Certainly there is a place for acute care, acute situations, for people who can't function, who are psychotic, but these things do work up to a point. And I think they're a great tool in order to get someone stable and safe. But once they're stable and safe, I think we have to put on our thinking caps and ask, well, why did this happen? Because in my opinion, I really believe that there's going to be, once you can figure out all the root causes and address them, that ultimately those medications can be tapered and discontinued, ideally. I'm not saying that's true for everyone. Not everyone can do the work that's necessary or have the capability of doing the work or the finances, sometimes of doing the work. But I think that there is definitely hope that medication is one tool and it's not a forever tool.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. So let's dig in because, if we look at I was looking at these stats earlier. So, a woman over 40, 1 in 5, at least the last study I read, 1 in 5 will experience depression. 1 in 3 will experience anxiety, and panic attacks are right up there. And it really is this 40 and up range where our hormones are kind of all over the place. So, let's dig into, what's the underlying sort of drivers, particularly of depression? Because medicine and particularly Western medicine makes us believe that it's a lack of, some sort of medication. But there's underlying causes. And I'd love to kind of dig into that so people understand that it's more than just what you get told, advertising for a drug.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. The chemical imbalance theory has been disproven. And there's a lot of theories now that are, being used as a hypothesis. And I feel like that there's a lot more support for those theories. But, just to answer your question, the 5 root causes, and these are big blocks of root causes, but that would be what I call the shift protocol. This is a paradigm shift in terms of how we look at people. And so the S stands for stress. The H stands for hormones, which we can go down that path a little bit more. Stress, hormones, infections, chronic infections. And that could be bacterial infections, viral infections that are chronically there at higher titers, parasites, H. pylori. There's a whole host of people that have infections and biofilms that have persistent infections. So stress, hormones, infection, food, definitely food, and toxins. We're surrounded by toxins, and it's almost like having a fish in a fish tank, a dirty fish tank. So those fish are going to get sick and die if you don't clean the tank. And we're kind of in our own little earth tank. Instead of, breathing in water, we're breathing air. And our air is a lot better over the years. But, we are being surrounded by toxins that are chemicals in our indoors. There's mycotoxins. There's a whole host of things in that category as well. So basically shift. So we usually start with food and changing the diet. The top 2 that we find, it's especially people who are very inflamed, that the top 2 that need to be addressed is gluten and dairy. And at least to have a trial of that out of the body. And we call it unmuddying the puddle. It's just a way to just to make sure we just take that out of the equation, just to see what's under that. And maybe down the line, you could reintroduce it. But I think it's really good to remove that in the beginning while we're doing what I call the treatment phase.
Yeah, I think people would be amazed at the impact, particularly of gluten and dairy that have, stronger research indicating that not only are they inflammatory and immune stimulating and immune dysregulating, but they're, potential triggers for mood disorder. But I think people are often shocked at the impact of what they eat and how that may change their mood. Even things like blood sugar, even things like eating sort of erratically and how that might make them more anxious or even more depressed.
Definitely blood sugar crashes from eating a high carb diet, eating a lot of sugar. People get hangry. We say hangry, but that's a mood. I mean, it's a change in your mood, right? And hypoglycemia is definitely a thing. And people don't even realize how much their blood sugars drop. I actually had a patient that woke up in the middle of the night with panic attacks because the blood sugar dropped so low. And your body is absolutely going to wake you up in an emergency, because if it allowed it to go even lower, you would die. So it's an emergency bell going off in your body to wake you up and do something. So it's rushing cortisol into your system in order to flush glucose into the cells, right? It's a survival mechanism that's built into your body, and it's not something that's going wrong per se in terms of having the panic attack. It's an alarm bell saying, hey, there's something inside your body, probably due to the heavy meal you had hours before. And, so there's lots of situations where blood sugars can cause significant problems, or dysregulation of blood sugars, I should say.
Yeah, so I have a question for you. I've been in this world for like 20 years, and obviously I see a little bit of everything, and I'd say mood is almost always, one of the many things that we're working on. Do you find that when you start talking about particularly removing foods from the diet, that this is often challenging for your patients to really go through? Because we have not only a convenience factor but we have emotional attachments to food.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. We always start with where the person's at. And, if they have a history of disordered eating, we certainly work around that, and certainly do some work around the emotions about why, what is it all about? How deep is this, and how long, how many years, when did it start? And we work around it. I think it's important to address those issues. It doesn't mean to say that you won't change some aspects of the diet until we can get around those issues, but then it's a slower process. But ultimately, we put the person, the patient, client, in the driver's seat to make those decisions. And it's about making choices. We got off the call earlier with a patient who said, well, I only cheated twice. And it's like, let's change that word from cheat to choice. You're making choices, right? Because what does cheating mean? It means I'm hiding something or I'm doing something on the sly. And then the emotions that come with that typically are shame or guilt or I'm bad, right? Yeah. And so it's really looking at our language and how we talk about the food that makes a big difference. I love Julia Ross's book called The Crave Cure, right? Excellent book to sort of figure out what's driving cravings. So it's really great book. So I send my patients to the quiz that's on her website just to help discern and start thinking about these things and to try to be curious about it. So some people are controlled by food and there's so much fear around it. We try to change the mindset around it about being curious, and rather than anxious and fearful, taking that fear power away from food and putting more joy into eating food. But starting with the foods that you haven't tried or you really do enjoy, right? And it's making choices.
Yeah. Yeah. Now let's dig in a little bit to the other side of the coin, anxiety. Obviously, and I think depression also is a symptom of anxiety also. And I think sometimes in our diagnostic world, we like to break somebody down into some sort of code. So insurance companies will reimburse. Let's face it, that's where all diagnoses come from. People get labeled as one way or the other, but they often coexist. Let's talk a little bit about anxiety and how would somebody know whether they're sitting in the anxiety bucket or if they've got sort of crossover? And how does that play out?
It depends on what comes first. Sometimes depression comes first. And so they feel, Freud said it was anger turned inwards, so they tend to feel shame or guilt, if you're talking about other feelings that come with that. And when a person is in that place for a long time, they start becoming then secondary anxiety about, oh, if I'm not doing anything, who's going to talk about me? Or, start having all of these thoughts that then ultimately become anxious thoughts. And then that could be, you see them coexist at the same time. 60% of people who are depressed also have coexisting comorbid anxiety. A person who starts off anxious can start feeling like they're not accomplishing things. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? What if this? What if that? And they start feeling, and there's different scenarios. I'm just giving you one, start feeling like they lose control and then not know what to do. And then they feel hopeless. And then that results into depression. So anxiety tends to be more fear-based, worrying, feeling a loss of control, so to speak. Whereas depression leads more to hopelessness, helplessness. Depression is more turned inwards. Anxiety tends to be more outwards. But those are real general, very general, kinds of descriptions, but there's a lot of overlap. Anyway, but these both symptoms, though, don't necessarily have to be psychological based. I say that, that depression and anxiety really reside in the body that affects the brain, right? And that could be also mania and psychosis as well. And so we spend so much time treating a head and not connecting it to the body. And I treat the body, and that then affects the brain. And so the understanding that I have is that inflammation is the driver of depression and anxiety. And we want to reduce inflammation. In fact, I went to the Neuroimmune conference yesterday. It was a virtual conference, a 2-day conference. And I felt so satisfied when this particular presenter, he's in England, and I believe his last name was Bandiker, but I could be wrong. I might be misremembering it. But anyway, he indicated that 30% he felt that depression should be subtyped, and that 30% of the people in the population have the inflammatory subtype. And the way to know that is by looking at the HSCRP, which is an inflammatory marker. And that's not the only marker that he talked about. There are other inflammatory markers. But if we could separate that group and treat the inflammation, the depression would also be treated. I thought that was so amazing because I found that in my practice that I could tell just by getting the history, whoa, the 5R gut restoration is probably not going to be doing much for this person, but let's do the testing and see what else we can find. And, I'm usually right about that. So it tends to be more psychosocial or trauma-based, not that those things couldn't affect your gut and cause other comorbidities, but the higher comorbidities, the more inflammation there is. And it's usually those things that cause the depression or the anxiety. It's almost like everything in the body below, finally, it starts just going off and affecting the brain almost, right? And most people who are in that position that have these other issues, they intuitively know, like, this is not depression. This is something else. And I'm not depressed. I'm not anxious. This is different for me. Like most people intuitively know. And so that's why I wrote the book, What If It's Not Depression? Because I don't think it's depression, right? So that doesn't mean to say that people who have a long history of chronic depression couldn't also develop these chronic medical issues that then make their depression even worse and worse. So these kinds of things show up differently and everyone's different. So as a psychiatrist, I consider myself a detective and find out what your specific fingerprint is. Everybody has a different fingerprint. Well, everybody has a different clinical history, different experiences. They come with different genetics and epigenetics. All of that makes a difference, and everyone has their own fingerprint, and so everyone should have their own treatment plan too.
Absolutely. Well, let's dig in. So let's dig in a little bit into the hormone picture because,
Mhm.
again, if we look at those stats, 1 in 3 women are going to have anxiety, 1 in 5 will have a clinically diagnosable depression
Mhm.
during the menopause transition. And let's face it, Western medicine just ignores the entire hormonal picture.
Right.
So, how do you look at it and how do you help your patients understand that, it may very well be your shift protocol, but that the hormones may be a big player as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. And what also I mean, when you get a history, let me back up. So when you get a history, obviously looking at the age matters. And I would say looking as or even as early as 30 to see if there's any changes in or hormonal shift. And the reason is that stress can affect your hormones. So when I talk about stress, it's not like everyday stress. I'm talking about serious stress that causes your cortisol levels to shoot up, and remain high for whatever reason that's happening. And that those kinds of things, the chronic cortisol levels can shut down your ability to make hormones. And that's a piece of it. It can also change how your thyroid hormone is being expressed. So you might have normal thyroid TSH, but the way I see it is that when there's high stress, your cortisol is like the accelerator in the body. Well, the body has these mechanisms in place where when your body's revving up, just like a car, you need a brake to give it balance. And so the thyroid acts like a brake. Sometimes people think they just have a thyroid problem, and all they want to do is give them thyroid hormone. Like, I don't think my thyroid is medications, right? Well, but you have to look at the whole picture. And if there's high stress, you kind of really don't want to give higher thyroid medication. You want to deal with the stress because the body is acting in a normal, healthy fashion. And so, what you want to do is look at what's causing stress in the body. It doesn't have to be emotional stress or environmental stressors, or social stressors, but it could be some kind of stress in the body that the thyroid's trying to manage. But that interplay can absolutely 100% affect your sex hormones. And I personally don't give people bioidentical hormones until these other areas are addressed, because that would be a huge disservice to giving you sex hormones and just treating the sex hormone. All that's going to just be converted right to cortisol. And that's why and the way to know that that's happening is that the doses go higher and higher and higher of the sex hormones. And you're wondering, why do I keep needing higher doses? Because it's all being converted to cortisol. Yeah, that's a part of the question. But there's other pieces of the puzzle, because if you have a history of trauma, early childhood events, if your ACE score is higher, I'm sure you've probably talked about that on I don't want to explain what that is, but you can probably put a link in your notes about what the ACE score is and how to get your ACE score. It's actually part of my intake. But when you have a high ACE score and if you have a history of PMS right from the get-go, then you know already that your stress level is high. Because if you're getting your period and you're getting all these severe cramps, your hormones are already off. They're already dysregulated at a young age. And so by the time, if you don't do something about that at some point, in those 20s, do the functional medicine approach and clean that up. Because if you don't, by the time you hit perimenopause, it's going to be hell. So, right? And menopause, right? It's going to be a real roller coaster. So, it's really important to take care of that dysregulation. The HPA axis regulation needs to be addressed or regulated. The dysregulation needs to be addressed and regulated so that you are going into perimenopause and menopause smoothly. A lot of people think that menopause is always bad. No, it's because your hormones are off. And there's ways to make it easier by cleaning up the toxins in your body. Estrogen disruptors are a big cause for some of this hormone dysregulation. So cleaning up your liver, getting rid of these toxins that have built up from plastics, being surrounded by plastics and VOCs and such. So, am I missing anything else? I'm trying to think that affects hormones. But I think that's the bulk of it. Really improving. Oh, there is one piece. making sure that your cholesterol level is above 150. There are people whose cholesterol levels are really low. In fact, the lower your cholesterol level, the more likely you're going to get depressed. There are studies that show that cholesterol levels below 110 can cause severe depression and chronic suicidal ideation. It's really, really important to get your cholesterol level above 150 because cholesterol is important to make hormones. And you need cholesterol to line the nerve cells. All your nerve cells are made of a phospholipid layer. And it's insulation for all your nerve cells are made from fat. All of these things are made from fat. So it's really important to have good, healthy fats in your body. And that's where diet comes in. You can actually create a change just in changing the types of fats. The types of fats, higher omega-3s should be much higher than omega-6s. There's a certain ratio, 2-to-3 ratio of omegas. But in the standard American diet, it is omega-3 is 1-to-16 of omega-6s. That's what the standard American, it's really, really off. That's why we recommend omega-3 fish oil. And if you don't have fish, there are vegan versions of omega-3s, but that's really good for your brain. Really good for your brain.
Yeah, I'm glad you talked about the HPA axis because I'm a fierce critic. I'm a fierce critic of a lot of things. Anybody that listens to my show, I'm obviously a fierce critic of conventional medicine and the running away with the Women's Health Initiative and the misinformation and gaslighting of women's health. But even this sort of push today to get menopause treatment, mainstreamed, right? I applaud it. But then the vast majority of the people that are getting a lot of airplay talk about, just throw hormones at women. Like if you're symptomatic, just give hormones until the symptoms go away and then thumbs up, you're awesome. Right. And so, they're basically not doing any checking of hormones. They're not checking for efficacy of dose. And it's just, if your hot flashes and night sweats go away and you have a remote amount of libido, you must be fine. And it's doing women a lot of disservice because I probably have one woman that's a poster child. I'm thinking about getting a picture like Employee of the Month picture that said, you know what, I haven't really been stressed out for the last couple decades. I'm like, wow, okay, can I take your picture? Because you need to be on the wall as like, wow, this is epic. Because the reality is most of us enter this time period, our hair's been on fire for decades.
Oh, I know.
And just throwing hormones into mix and overlooking that very critical biological need of stress management and protection of the species, right? It just means that we throw stuff at people and we're not doing good medicine. We're not doing women a service. And I feel like there's just so much more opportunity here to help women transition through perimenopause and menopause. But of course, the mental health aspects of that. Because I think really when you look at it, yes, we're worried about heart disease and, osteoporosis and Alzheimer's, but we're living as a group feeling like crap every day.
Right. Right. Absolutely. Lots of people are feeling like crap every day. And I really dislike personally the siloed approach and just suppress symptoms. Okay, we suppress those symptoms, you're on your way. And not really connecting the dots as to why they're even having the symptoms. Because if you really look at the whole body holistically, sometimes there's a couple things that you can do that can improve systems across the board, And you can do so much to have someone feel better just by changing the diet, by looking at the gut, the gut-brain connection. That's another theory with increased gut permeability. So much research supporting that if you can, clean up the gut, it cleans up the brain, so to speak. So, and we don't even address the stress that people have. It's like, oh yeah, everybody's got stress, oh, well, why don't you just do some breathing here? Here's a meditation for you. It's just not addressed on a deeper level about like what's going on and with the stress, and how about doing some vagal nerve stimulation or even connecting the dots that the stress that you have is causing perturbations in your hormones, and that's why you are not feeling good in your brain. Like just connecting all the dots. And when I connect the dots for people, it's like, oh, that makes so much sense. How come nobody else has told me these things? Education's, a lot of professional, doctors believe that patients won't change. They won't, you give them recommendations and they won't change. I believe that if you say it in a way that they understand and you see how they're going to win, how they'll win in the end, what's in it for me, right? And really, for the person who's not feeling well, if you can explain it to them and put the steps one by one in front of them, they will follow it. I mean, I do this every day, right? And I think when people see that they have gotten well, I've had patients who've transformed their lives, and then I see their husband or their wife, and it's like, I can't believe how well he's doing. I want you to do it for me too. It's just like they're amazed. And these are people who've been suffering for decades, decades, and not believing that they will ever get well until they learn about functional medicine and find the right practitioner for them.
Yeah. Yeah. So tell my listeners, if they were, let's say, struggling in this time period and they're trying to figure out what do they need to do? Obviously, a functional medicine practitioner in their environment. But what are like 2 or 3 things that they could do that might have a big impact on their mood and depression and or anxiety, that like just some very basic stuff. So they go, okay, I feel like I've got, I took the first step on that stair to move up, without feeling overwhelmed. Because that's common. They feel overwhelmed. Like that's adding to my overwhelm.
Right, right. Well, most people know if they were to write down and to answer the question, what have I done that has made me feel good? They can usually come up with a couple things, 2, 3 things. They may have tried something and they felt good, but then they just never continued. The key is to find those things that have made you feel good and to keep doing on a daily basis. I mean, we call it creating habits, right? And then you want to stack those habits, one on top of the other. And when you start doing it every single day, you have some sustaining of that mood, believe it or not. It's not just that one time when you did it, it really lasts. And then looking at the things that don't make you feel well. Like, oh, I really don't like that person in my life. They make me feel horrible whenever I'm with them. I think I'm just going to end the relationship. Like, what are the things in your life day to day that really get you down and don't? By far, most people can pick 2 or 3 things that they already know, right? They already know it. And it's just taking action and doing something about it that makes the difference. And that, when you do that and see the change, then you'll feel empowered to do the next thing. So, and that's not even meeting with a functional medicine doctor. You have the power and the knowledge in you. You're just not acting on it. You have to stop reading all the self-help books and stop reading them, put them down and start doing something that you've read. Actually put it into action, because reading it is not going to change your life. It's giving you information that you need to put into action. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's so important. As a fellow, scientific information junkie, knowledge is not power if it's not put in action. And capturing more information isn't going to go anywhere. And it takes really that very first step of going, okay, today I'm going to put that one thing in action. And then I'm going to, then I'm going to start stacking and getting efficacy.
Right, right. And then, then if you get stuck or you don't know what to do next, that's when you need someone, a coach or a functional medicine practitioner. That's when, but you can do so much for free on your own. And so that's when people pick up the phone and call me. It's like,
Yeah.
this, and this, and but now I don't know what to do. And I don't want to play around with this, that, and the other thing. I really want some guidance.
Yeah. Now, I'm curious, I'm sure that you probably get this, my practitioners in my building often get this as well, that, one of the people you may talk to in a family unit is kind of on board with this idea. Because, for some people, the idea that disease states or diagnosis codes or whatever you want to talk about, however you want to label them, have shared, underlying mechanisms. And that often, if you clean up something, a whole bunch of things get better. So usually there's one person in the family that has that understanding. And my experience is often there's somebody else that's like, what you talking about? You know? What is it that he used to do? What you talking about, Willis? What are you talking about? Like, that can't be real, right?
Right.
And sometimes I think that's really hard, because it's well-meaning family members, but they may not also be helping.
Right. They're skeptical or they're really entrenched in the conventional way. They might be a doctor, a conventional doctor, right? So I think conventional doctors are the hardest people to treat because they're just stuck in the dogma and they don't question it. And if it doesn't fit, if it's a piece of the puzzle that just doesn't fit, they just throw it away or they say, it was a spontaneous remission. It's hilarious. But anyway, yeah, it is tough. I usually have people bring their partner, spouse, or whoever it is that's in their household to come into the sessions and I do the best I can to educate them and also get a sense of really how rigid they really are and try to have them come around or at least to support the person's, the patient or client's decision to try another way because this other way, and I try to get them to admit like they've tried this, this, and this. Did any of that work? So how would it hurt to do this? And obviously, I have them try to read my book. That gives a lot of information, and if they're willing, I can send them resources to read even more about it if they want. But most people aren't interested in that. I think it really comes down to trust, and believing. And if I take the time, which most doctors don't, if I take the time to reach out and listen and explain, then they usually appreciate that.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say that's true. That's definitely true. Now, I could talk to you for hours because we're also friends. So on the side, we get to talk to each other about once a month anyway. But I know you've got some things that I wanted to make sure we talked about, and, how somebody might be able to work with you. And I know you've got a free gift. So tell me first, you've got a cool project that you're working on, and I'd love to share that with my listeners.
Yeah, it's called the Healing Depression Project. And the founder and CEO is Silvio Covelli. She had treatment resistant depression for decades of her life, and she managed to find a way to resolve her own depression. And she felt that she really needed to put a plan together, a project together to help others do the same. And she found me as the clinical director, and Kat Toops is the research director. And it is basically a 4-week retreat using the functional medicine approach and creating lifestyle habits and changes in that 4 weeks, learning how to cook, move your body, do yoga, meditate, breathe, everything that we would do as functional medicine providers to effect a change in their mood. And we invite all patients that have chronic treatment-resistant depression to look into the program if they're interested. It's a 4-week on-site program in Austin, Texas. And after that, your lifestyle is also looked at in terms of when you leave, and with 2 weeks follow-up, daily follow-up, to make sure that everything that you've learned is going to be set up in your life when you return for the following 2 weeks by daily follow-up calls. And so we really believe that the functional medicine approach and certain interventions each intervention is research-based, but no one's really put this all together and created on a daily basis these habits in those 5 areas that I talked about, right? So yeah, you can look for us at www.healingdepressionproject.com. And you can get more information from that site. And also, if you're interested, book a discovery call.
That's awesome. And then you also have a free gift for my listeners.
Yeah.
If they go out, they can get a couple chapters of your book, which is awesome. Tell them about that.
Yeah, you can download 3 chapters of my book for free. My book is What If It's Not Depression? Your Guide to Finding Answers and Solutions. And you can buy it if you want on Amazon. It's not that expensive. Or you can get Audible. You can get a paperback or Audible version. And that's it. Yeah. And people can find me at Functional Mind. It's www.fxnmind.com. I'm based in Providence, Rhode Island.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Achina, I am so happy that we got a chance to talk. and have you on Menopause Mastery. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. And guess what? I didn't tell you. I got my Texas license on Friday.
For anybody, Texas license takes forever. You can grow old waiting for it. That's awesome.
Yes,
That's so
I'm
wonderful.
licensed in Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and Texas. Mhm.
Yay, welcome. Welcome to Texas then. Well, awesome. Thank you, Dr. Achina. And thank you, everybody, for listening to Menopause Mastery. And I'll be back with you next week.
Thank you so much for tuning in to the Menopause Mastery podcast. You are why I'm here, and I am so very grateful. Hit subscribe so you don't miss any wisdom on creating the most exceptional life on our terms. If this episode has helped you in any way, please share it with a friend to spread the love, and together we rise. You can follow me on social media at Betty Murray, PhD, and you can reach me online at bettymurray.com.